His hands were shaking. Not from cold. October in the Tonto Basin still holds 90-degree heat through sunrise. His hands were shaking because he was holding a Springfield rifle with 4 rounds and standing in his doorway looking at 30 Apache riders on the ridge and knowing, with the certainty of a man who has spent 6 days waiting for this exact moment, that the 4 rounds wouldn't matter. What would matter was what he'd done 6 days ago. What would matter was the woman sleeping in his back room with a bullet hole in her shoulder. And what would matter most, the thing he'd discovered yesterday on a ridge with a shell casing in his palm, was who put the bullet there. Because it wasn't the Apache. It was someone much closer. Someone watching the 30 riders right now from a house with glass windows 200 yards east. Watching and smiling. Because the 30 riders were exactly what that someone had been waiting for. The excuse. The proof that Silas Cobb had chosen the wrong side of a line the territory had drawn in blood. But the territory didn't know what Silas knew. And the thing Silas knew, a small brass casing with an X scratched into its base, was about to rearrange every piece of the story. Every piece, starting with the man in the glass window house. Before we continue, please subscribe to channel and tell me where you're watching from 6 days earlier. The Tonto Basin, Arizona Territory, October 1881. The basin was a landscape designed for hiding and dying. Deep canyons cutting through pine-covered mesas, dry washes that ran with rattlesnakes and monsoon ghosts, the Mogollon Rim rising 2,000 feet to the north like a wall between the territory that pretended to be civilized and the territory that didn't pretend. Settlers had been moving in since the mid-1870s, after General George Crook launched the Tonto Basin Campaign of 1872 to 73, using Apache scouts, including the Medal of Honor recipient Alchazay and his White Mountain Warriors, to track and capture every hostile Tonto Apache band. The campaign worked. The Tonto were crushed, herded onto the San Carlos Reservation, a stretch of land the Apache called Hell's 40 Acres, because the ground was barren and the heat was biblical, and the government agent who was supposed to feed them fed himself first and sometimes forgot the second part. The Tonto homeland was handed to ranchers and miners and men like Silas Cobb. Given, like handing a man a house and forgetting to mention who used to live in it. October 8th. Silas was riding the southern edge of his property on his mule, looking for a stray cow, when his neighbor appeared on the road. Horace Vetch, 200 acres adjacent to Silas's 40, a house with glass windows, 60 head of cattle, a beef contract with Fort McDowell, and the specific prosperity of a man who had arrived in the basin with money he never explained. Vetch pulled up alongside Silas with the friendly expression of a man delivering concern. "Heard a gunshot from the South Basin yesterday," Vetch said. "Down by the dry wash. You be careful. My man Lyle saw Apache tracks near your fence line. They've been leaving San Carlos again." He tipped his hat. He rode east. Friendly, concerned, helpful. And Silas, who was careful by nature and suspicious by experience, filed the conversation the way he filed everything Vetch said, as information that might not be true. Because Vetch had been trying to buy Silas's 40 acres for 2 years. Silas's land sat on a stretch of Tonto Creek that ran year-round, the only reliable water for 3 miles. Vetch's 60 cattle needed that water. Vetch needed that land. And a careful man who has said no to a powerful neighbor twice doesn't stop being careful just because the neighbor shows up with a friendly warning. Silas rode south, toward the dry wash, not because of Vetch's warning, because the stray cow had probably wandered there. He was riding toward a cow. The universe was riding him toward something else. And what he found in that wash, bleeding, barely conscious, with a bullet in her left shoulder and Apache beadwork on her dress, was about to cost him everything he had and give him something he didn't know existed. And the neighbor who had smiled at him 10 minutes ago was the reason the woman was bleeding. But Silas didn't know that yet. He would learn, and the learning would bring 30 riders to his ridge, and a turquoise, stone to his fence post, and a sentence from a dying woman's daughter that would make the audience re-watch this entire story from the beginning. She was lying in the sandy bottom of the dry wash, half hidden by creosote. Young, maybe 25. A deerskin dress with Apache beadwork at the collar, turquoise and red geometric patterns, the work of hands that understood beauty as a form of identity. Her black hair was matted with sand and blood. The blood came from her left shoulder, entry wound in the back, exit wound through the front, the size of a silver dollar, missing the lung by an inch. She was conscious, barely. Her dark eyes tracked Silas as he dismounted. The eyes were not afraid. They were calculating, the fast, invisible math of a wounded person assessing whether the approaching stranger is more dangerous than the wound. Silas lifted her onto the mule, and the memory hit him, not gradually, not gently, the way a fist hits a wall. He was 8 years old. His mother was on the kitchen floor in their house in Tennessee. His father was standing over her. His mother was looking at the door, not at young Silas crouching behind it, but at the door itself, at the possibility that someone might walk through it and make the hitting stop. Nobody walked through. Nobody came. The door stayed closed, and 8-year-old Silas, too small to open it, too small to do anything except watch through the crack and memorize the expression on his mother's face, carried that expression for 26 years. The expression of a woman calculating whether help exists, until he saw it again, in a dry wash in Arizona, on the face of a woman he'd never met, the same calculation, the same eyes measuring the distance between hope and nothing. And this time, Silas was not too small. This time, he was the door. He tore his shirt and pressed the cotton against the exit wound. She flinched. Her jaw tightened. She did not scream. The silence of a person trained to endure, a person who understood that sound carries in the desert, and the thing that shot her might still be listening. He lifted her across the mule, gently, supporting the wound side, the way he handled injured calves. She weighed less than he expected, the weight of a person who had been surviving on not enough food for too long. He walked 2 miles back to his farmhouse with a bleeding woman on his mule, and the memory of a kitchen floor and a closed door, and the specific understanding that what he was doing would bring consequences he couldn't calculate. He was right. The consequences came in 3 waves. First, the neighbors. Second, the army. Third, the 30 riders. But between the first wave and the third, Silas would discover something about the bullet in this woman's shoulder that would connect a shell casing to a cattle fraud, to a government contract, to a circle of theft so complete that the woman on his mule was bleeding from both ends of it, shot by the man who stole her people's food, and left to die in the basin where her people used to live before the government took it and gave it to men like the man who shot her. But that discovery was 5 days away. Right now, the woman was bleeding, and the mule was walking, and Silas Cobb, 34 years old, careful, quiet, the son of a woman who needed help and never got it, was carrying the consequence home. Her name was Ishta. She told him on the 2nd day, the first day conscious enough for speech. Her voice was rough, the English accented and precise, learned from reservation school teachers and army scouts who spoke it as a tool, not a language of warmth. Ishta. Then, water. Silas brought water. She drank. Then she told him what happened, in fragments, between waves of pain that made her jaw lock and her hands grip the blanket. She was Tonto Apache. Her band had been at San Carlos for 7 years. Since Crook's campaign, since the scouts tracked them through these same canyons and brought them to Hell's 40 acres. Ishta had left the reservation 3 days before the shooting. Not to raid, not to fight, to find medicine. Plants that grew in the Tonto Basin and didn't grow at San Carlos, juniper berries, yarrow root, the specific medicines her mother needed. Her mother had the coughing sickness, tuberculosis, the disease that was killing the reservation Apache faster than cavalry ever had because confined people in overcrowded conditions with insufficient food are perfect hosts for a bacterium that feeds on weakness. The government doctor visited San Carlos once a month and prescribed rest and clean air to people who had neither. Ishta had found the plants. She was in the dry wash, filling her gathering basket when the shot came from behind. She didn't see the shooter. She heard the crack. A long sound. A rifle, not the shorter crack of a cavalry carbine. A rancher's rifle. Someone on the ridge. Someone who saw an Apache woman in the basin and decided she didn't belong there and delivered the decision with a bullet from 200 yards. On the morning of October 10th, Vetch rode over again. Friendly. Concerned. He brought a sack of flour. "For your trouble," he said, leaning on the fence with the easy posture of a good neighbor. His eyes moved to the house, to the window. Silas watched the eyes move and filed it. The way you file a horse's ear rotation, information about what the animal is looking at. "How are things?" Vetch asked. Not casually. Specifically. The question of a man checking on the status of something he already knows about. "Fine," Silas said. "Quiet." Vetch smiled, tipped his hat, rode east, left the flour on the fence post. That afternoon, Vetch's ranch hand, Lyle, rode past Silas's property, slowly. A red-headed man with freckled hands and a rifle across his saddle. The rifle he touched the way Ishta had described. Proudly, the caress of a man who has used a tool recently and is pleased with the result. Lyle looked at the window. Through the window, Ishta looked back. And Lyle's expression, visible for 1 second before he nudged his horse forward, was not surprise. It was confirmation. He knew she was there. He'd known since the dry wash. Because Lyle hadn't just seen tracks near Silas's fence line. Lyle had put the bullet in Ishta's shoulder. And Vetch, the friendly neighbor with the flour and the concern and the glass windows, had sent him to verify that the woman he'd shot had crawled to the exact place where Vetch needed her, inside the house of the man whose 40 acres Vetch wanted to take. The bullet wasn't random. The bullet was a tool. The same way the ledger was Pardo's tool and the grain sack was Skaggs's tool. A bullet in an Apache woman plus a white man who helps her equals a community that turns on the white man. And a community that turns on a man leaves his 40 acres unprotected. Vetch didn't need to fight Silas. He needed to isolate him. And an Apache woman with a bullet wound was the most efficient isolation device in the Tonto Basin. On the 4th day, 3 neighboring ranchers rode to Silas's fence line, not to help, to deliver a message. They dismounted at the fence, 3 men from the Pleasant Valley cluster, men Silas had traded with, shared water with, nodded to at the territorial supply post. They didn't cross the fence. The fence was the line. The message was in the knot crossing. "We know what you've got in there, Cobb." The oldest was Beale, 50, weathered, opinions hardened into positions the way mud hardens into brick. An Apache woman, in your house, in the basin, after what they did here. The what they did here was the Tonto Basin raids of the early 1870s, Apache attacks on settler homesteads that killed dozens and burned farms and drove the territory to send Crook. The memory was real. The fear was earned. The application of that fear to a wounded woman gathering medicine for her dying mother was not. But fear doesn't distinguish. Fear paints with the widest brush available and calls precision a luxury it can't afford. "She was shot," Silas said, "in the back, while gathering plants. She's Apache. The basin isn't Apache land anymore. Being shot in the back isn't a land dispute." Beale's face hardened past brick into stone. "Get her out, or we handle it ourselves. Vetch says the Army ought to know about a settler harboring reservation Indians." "He's right," Vetch says. Of course Vetch says. Vetch, who delivered flour and concern and the specific friendliness of a man building a noose out of neighborliness. Vetch, who was feeding the community's fear the way he fed his cattle, strategically, on a schedule, toward slaughter. The three ranchers remounted, rode north, didn't look back. Silas went inside. Ishta was sitting up in bed. She'd heard everything through the window. Her dark eyes held the expression he was learning to read, not fear, but calculation. The assessment of a woman who has been calculating danger her entire life because the territory has been dangerous her entire life. "You should take me back," she said. "The reservation is 3 days' walk. I can make it. You've got a hole in your shoulder. I've had worse from worse men. The hole will heal. Your neighbors won't." She was right. His neighbors wouldn't heal. The visit from Beale was the warning. The next visit would be enforcement. And Vetch was the surgeon, cutting Silas away from the community one neighbor at a time, using a wounded woman as the scalpel. Silas made a decision, not the careful decision, the other one. "You're not leaving until you can ride, and when you leave, you're leaving on a horse, not crawling through a wash. You have 1 mule. I'll figure it out." Why? The one-word question, the same question the frontier asks every person who crosses a line the community has drawn. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because my mother needed help once, and nobody came, and the door stayed closed, and I've been walking through every closed door I've seen since I was 8 years old, because the one door I couldn't open is the one I see every time I close my eyes. You're not the door. You're the person on the other side of it. And this time, somebody's coming through." By the way, if this story has you gripped, hit subscribe and tell me which country you're watching from. Because what Silas finds on that ridge tomorrow, 1 shell casing with 1 mark, is about to connect the bullet in Ishta's shoulder to the man who's been trying to steal his land for 2 years. And when 30 riders arrive at dawn, the thing they bring is not what anyone expects. On the 5th day, Silas rode back to the dry wash, not for the stray cow. The cow had come home 3 days ago. He rode for the ridge where Ishta said the shot came from. He climbed the rock slope above the wash. He found the spot, a flat rock with a clear sight line to the creosote bush where Ishta had been gathering. He found scuff marks. He found the imprint of a man's knee in the sand, and he found the shell casing, a .4 5-70 government round, Springfield rifle, standard for half the basin. But this casing had a mark, a small X scratched into the brass base. Every reloader marks their brass for identification. Every man who reloads his own ammunition has a signature. Silas knew this mark. He'd seen it on casings scattered around the fence post where Vetch's ranch hand Lyle did target practice on Saturday afternoons. Lyle's X, Lyle's brass, Lyle's rifle, Lyle's bullet. And Lyle worked for Vetch. The shape was solid. Vetch wanted Silas's land. Vetch's man Lyle had shot Ishta in the basin, shot a gathering woman in the back with a rancher's rifle. Then Vetch had ridden over the next morning with flour and a warning about Apache tracks, a warning about the danger he himself had created. Then Lyle had ridden past the window to confirm the wounded woman was inside the target's house. Then Vetch had sent word to the neighbors through Beale. The shooting and the isolation were one operation. The bullet and the leverage came from the same ranch. The concerned neighbor was the architect of the entire thing. Silas put the casing in his pocket. He rode home. Ishta was standing in the doorway, holding his Springfield, not aimed, held across her body the way a person holds a tool they know how to use. She was looking south, toward Vetch's property. "Your neighbor's man," she said before Silas could speak. "The red-haired one. How did you know?" "Because he rode past this house yesterday. Slowly. He looked at the window. When he saw me looking back, he touched his rifle. The way you touch something you've used recently. Proudly." She paused. Then she said something that changed the scope of the story. "I've seen that mark before." "What mark?" "The X, on casings, at San Carlos, on the ground outside the cattle pen. The pen where the government's beef disappears every month." Silas stared at her. She was connecting something he hadn't seen. The X on Lyle's brass wasn't just on this one casing from the ridge. The same mark was on casings at San Carlos, near the cattle pen where the reservation's food supply vanished regularly. Lyle had been at San Carlos. Lyle had been near the cattle. And if Lyle's brass was at both locations, at the ridge where Ishta was shot, and at the reservation where cattle disappeared, then Vetch's operation was bigger than a land grab. Vetch was stealing Apache cattle from San Carlos, driving them to his ranch, and selling them to Fort McDowell as contract beef. The Army was buying stolen Apache food and paying Vetch for it. The Apache were starving because their cattle were being taken by the man whose employee had just shot a woman trying to gather medicine, because the medicine the government was supposed to provide never arrived, because the food the government was supposed to deliver was being stolen by the man who shot the woman who needed the medicine. A circle, a perfect closed circle of theft. With the Apache at the center, being robbed from both ends, and the woman standing in Silas's doorway, holding a rifle and connecting shell casings from two locations 300 miles apart, was the only person who had seen the full circle. Because she'd been inside it her entire life. Dawn of the 6th day. Silas stood in his doorway with his shaking hands and his 4 rounds and the 30 riders on the ridge, and the knowledge that the man in the glass window house was watching and smiling. This is where the story started. This is the moment. But now the audience knows what Silas knows: the X on the brass, the cattle circle, the friendly neighbor who built a noose. Now the 30 riders are not a mystery. They are an answer. A single rider separated from the line and came forward. An older man, 60s, bearing of authority, the weathered patience of someone who has negotiated with enemies longer than Silas has been alive. He wore traditional Apache clothing and a blue cavalry scout shirt. He stopped 30 yards from the porch. "The woman in your house," he said. English, clear. "She is my granddaughter." Granddaughter, not a stranger. Family. 30 riders for a granddaughter. The scale of the response matching the value of the person. A healer, the last healer, in a band where tuberculosis was killing people, and the government doctor came once a month and left prescriptions that required resources nobody had. "She was shot," Silas said. 6 days ago. In the wash. She's healing. We know. We have been watching your house for 3 days. 3 days. 30 riders in the basin for 3 days without Silas or Vetch or the neighbors seeing them. The Apache had invented concealment the way the canyon had invented shadow, as a natural function of the landscape. "You helped her," the grandfather said. Not a question, a verdict already rendered. "Your neighbors want you punished for it. The man in the glass house, his worker is the one who shot Ishta. We found the brass on the ridge. The X. We know." They knew. They'd found the same evidence, or more of it. They'd been watching Vetch's ranch. They'd been watching the cattle operation. The Apache intelligence network was operating in the basin that the Army had declared cleared, gathering information with the skill of a people who had survived this terrain for centuries. "We are not here for war," the grandfather said. "We are here for our healer, and for you." He turned to the 30 riders. He spoke in Apache. The riders moved, not toward Silas's house, but around it. They spread in a wide circle, 200 yards out, encircling the property. Not threatening Silas, protecting him. 30 riders forming a perimeter around 40 acres that the community had isolated. Inside the circle, Silas, Ishta, the mule, 7 cattle. Outside the circle, Vetch, Lyle, Beale, the neighbors, and the mathematics of a community that had drawn a line around a man and left him outside it. The Apache redrew the line. They drew it around him. And then they waited. Because the grandfather knew, the way he knew the terrain and the weather and the location of every shell casing on every ridge, that Vetch would not accept 30 Apache riders on his neighbor's property without response. Vetch would ride to Fort McDowell. The Army would come. And when the Army came, the shell casings and the cattle trails and the circle of theft would be visible to the one authority in the territory that Vetch couldn't buy. A military captain who had been suspicious of the beef contract for months but hadn't had the evidence to pull the thread. The grandfather was not waging war. He was waging patience. The patience that had kept the Apache alive through Crook's campaign and Hell's 40 acres and the government doctors who came once a month and left prescriptions written in a language the patients couldn't read for medicine the agency didn't stock. The patience of a people who understand that the oppressor's system can be turned against the oppressor if you know which lever to pull and how long to wait. The turquoise stone. Before the grandfather returned to the line, he reached into a pouch at his belt and placed something on Silas's fence post. Small, blue-green, a turquoise stone the color of the beadwork on Ishta's dress. "When this stone sits on your post," he said, "you're inside our circle. If you need us, remove the stone and place it on the ground. We will see it." A signal system older than the territory. A promise smaller than a fist and heavier than a contract. The stone sat on the gray wood of the fence post, blue-green against weathered pine, the color of the sky at the moment before the sky decides whether to storm or clear. Vetch rode to Fort McDowell that afternoon. He rode fast and he rode angry. And he rode with the specific confidence of a man who believes the system he's exploiting will also protect him. The Army came the next morning. 20 cavalrymen led by Captain Ellison, a career officer with dust-colored hair and the patient expression of a man who has been stationed in the basin long enough to know that the first version of any story is usually the least true. Ellison surveyed the scene. 30 Apache riders in a perimeter, a white rancher on his porch, a wounded Apache woman sitting in a chair in the morning sun with a bandage on her shoulder. The captain looked at Silas. "Your neighbor says you're harboring hostile Apache and that 30 warriors are occupying settler land. My neighbor's ranch hand shot an unarmed woman in the back while she was gathering medicine for her dying mother. The 30 warriors are her family. They're not occupying. They're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you. for someone with authority to look at the evidence instead of the accusation. Ellison paused. He was not a fool. A settler citing evidence instead of pleading innocence was unusual enough to warrant attention. What evidence? Silas held out the shell casing. The X on the base. This came from the ridge above the dry wash where the woman was shot. The mark belongs to Lyle Garvey, your neighbor Vetch's ranch hand. Lyle marks his brass for reloading. Every reloader in the basin knows Lyle's X. Ellison took the casing. He looked at it. He looked at Silas. And then a voice came from the porch. Clear, accented, the English of a woman who had learned the language to survive the people who spoke it. Captain. Ishta had stood up from the chair. She walked to the porch rail. Her shoulder was bandaged. Her posture was the posture of a woman who has been shot and has spent 6 days healing and has had enough of being discussed by men who haven't asked her a single question. I have something to show you. She held out her hand. In it, 3 shell casings, the same X mark on each base. These are from San Carlos, from the ground outside the cattle pen, the pen where the government's beef cattle disappear every month. The same mark, the same man, the same rifle. She set the casings on the porch rail in a row. 3 from San Carlos, 1 from the ridge, 4 casings, 4 X marks, 1 rifle. Your contractor, Mr. Vetch, sends his man Lyle to San Carlos to drive cattle from the reservation pen to Vetch's ranch. Vetch rebrands them and sells them to Fort McDowell as contract beef. The Army pays Vetch for cattle the government already paid to give to us. Our people starve because the food walks away on 4 legs in the middle of the night, behind a man with a marked rifle. She looked at Ellison with the gray calm of a woman delivering testimony she has been preparing inside her own head for longer than this conversation. I know the dates. I know the numbers. 47 head in June, 31 in August, 22 in September. I counted them. Every month. Through the window of my mother's house while my mother coughed and the pen got emptier, and the government doctor came once a month and said rest and clean air. The captain stood very still. 4 casings, matching marks, dates and numbers delivered with the precision of a bookkeeper. This was not an accusation. This was an audit. Delivered by a woman with a bullet wound from the same rifle that had been used at both crime scenes. Ellison looked at the shell casings on the porch rail. He looked at Vetch's ranch. The glass windows, the 60 cattle, the prosperity that didn't match the land. 60 cattle on 200 acres of basin scrub was too many animals for the acreage. He'd known this. He'd suspected the source. He hadn't had the thread to pull. Ishta had just handed him 4 threads with an X on each one. Lyle was arrested that afternoon. Vetch's ranch was investigated. Federal marshals from Fort McDowell audited the beef contract. The numbers, the familiar numbers, the 2 columns, didn't match. Vetch had been billing the Army for government-grade beef and delivering reservation cattle stolen from San Carlos Apache herds. The same cattle the Apache were supposed to eat. The same food the government had already paid a contractor to provide. A circle of theft. Apache food stolen by Vetch, sold to the Army, billed as contract beef. The Apache starving at both ends of the transaction, while a man with glass windows and a gold watch chain collected from the middle. Vetch was arrested. Not for the shooting. That was Lyle's charge. Vetch was charged with fraud, cattle theft, and false claims against the United States government. The beef contract was voided. The reservation agent who had failed to notice 47 cattle disappearing in a single month was dismissed, and Captain Ellison, standing on Silas's porch, looked at Ishta and said something that career officers in Arizona Territory did not typically say to Apache women. Your testimony will be needed at the hearing. Will you come? "I'll come," Ishta said. "I've been counting cattle through a window for 2 years, waiting for someone to ask." Ishta healed. She prepared to ride back to San Carlos on Silas's mule, because Silas had said, "I'll figure it out," when he had nothing figured out, and a man whose promises cost him everything he owns is a man whose promises are worth everything they cost. The 30 riders prepared to escort her home, and before she mounted the mule, Ishta stood on the porch and said something to Silas that the audience is not prepared for, something that reframed the entire story. "My mother died 4 days ago." Silas looked at her. "The medicine I went to gather, the juniper berries, the yarrow root. I was 2 days from San Carlos when your neighbor's man shot me. The bullet added 6 days to a journey that should have taken 2. The medicine would have been 3 days early. 3 days of treatment that might have given her another month, another season. Enough time for the government doctor to come back and actually help." She paused. "My mother didn't die of the coughing sickness. She died of 6 days. And the man who created those 6 days is in a cell because you carried me instead of calculating." 6 days. The bullet hadn't just hit Ishta. It had killed her mother. Slowly, by delay, by adding 6 days to a 2-day journey, by making 3 days early into 3 days late. Lyle's bullet killed 2 women, the one it hit and the one who died waiting for the medicine it delayed. 1 round, 2 deaths. And the audience, who has been watching a rescue story for 40 minutes, realizes they have been watching a murder story. The murder of a woman who died because the medicine was 6 days late, because the bullet was in her daughter's shoulder, because the man who fired it wanted the land of the man who saved her. Every link in the chain connected. Every column matched. And the woman at the center, the woman Silas carried on his back, was the only person alive who could see the full circle because she had been inside it, counting cattle through a window while her mother coughed. The 30 riders escorted Ishta home. The grandfather stopped on the ridge, the same ridge where this story started, and looked down at Silas standing on his porch beside a fence post with a turquoise stone on top. "Your mother," the grandfather said. "The one who needed help. Yes? She is the reason you opened the door. Yes?" The grandfather was quiet. Then, "My granddaughter's mother is the reason I brought 30 riders. We carry our mothers differently, but we carry them." He turned his horse. The 30 riders followed. They disappeared into the basin the way they'd appeared, like the landscape absorbing its own. And Silas stood on his porch. The ridge was empty. The sky was orange. The morning was quiet. The turquoise stone sat on the fence post, blue-green against gray wood, smaller than a fist, heavier than a contract. And a man who had come to Arizona because quiet men survive understood something his mother had known, and his father had tried to beat out of her, and the territory had tried to bury under 2 columns of numbers that never matched. Quiet men survive. But a man who opens the door that stayed closed when he was 8, the door he's been walking through ever since, that man doesn't just survive. He belongs, not to a place, to a circle drawn by 30 riders who came for a healer and found a man who carried when everybody else calculated. The mule was gone. The fence was the same fence. But on top of the post, where nothing had sat for 6 years of solitary ranching, a turquoise stone caught the morning light. Blue-green, the color of Ishta's beadwork, the color of the sky at the moment it decides. And the stone said what the grandfather said, and what the riders said, and what the door said when Silas finally walked through it. You are not outside. You are not alone. You are inside the circle. And the circle holds. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse. The frontier has more stories, and the best ones are about the people who carried when everybody else calculated.